We have some amazing panelists tonight, and Roger Albee, former Secretary of Ag, and quite the history buff on Vermont agriculture, is with us tonight. We have James Maroney, who is a former organic dairy farmer and really wanting to drive policy and agricultural policy specifically around dairies, and you guys should get on Vermont Digger and see some of the articles that have been put in there. And then we have our newest farmers in Rutland County. They will be starting their own farm on their own, and they've worked on a lot of farms, and they're also one of the benefits, and we're so graciously accept that everybody and several of these folks that are up on that picture came from Green Mountain College, and so it's a really loss. But Phil is a major in food systems, and Maya is an education major, and they're up at Boardman Hill Farm where a lot of these folks started, and we're really pleased to have them because if the future of food in Vermont, they're the future. So they need to have part in this conversation. And then Philip Ackerman-Leist, a board member at the Vermont Farmers Food Center, has been immersed in food systems and directly involved in the development of many of these young farmers at Green Mountain College, and now has a Regen by Design, an online education program. And Vern Grubinger could not be here tonight. He has a grant proposal that is very pressing, and but it panels in the future. Vern will be here. So if you guys don't mind having a seat. And I'm going to be asking some questions of the panelists, and then if you guys have questions, Stephen, who's with the Vermont Farmers Food Center also, will be taking those questions, and he'll bring them up. It'll make it a little faster if I ask the questions. So I think the good way to begin when you're going to talk about the future of food in Vermont and the potential that organic may have is to ask somebody like Roger. Roger, you can't carve the future out until you really know how we got to where we are to figure out exactly what the future is going to bring. So would you mind giving us, you're so amazing to listen to on the history of ag.
That's very kind. Thank you. I have this passion for ag history because I believe that unless you understand the past, it's sometimes difficult to appreciate the future. And in fact, Vermont really has quite a history if you look at the changes that have taken place over time. And certainly Rutland County has been a big part of that right from the beginning, almost. In a sense. Philip was saying that when we came in, and I reminded myself that one of the history points of Rutland County was when Congressman Marsh came down here in 1847 to the Rutland Fair at that time, which had been started in 1846. And delivered a speech about how there need to be greater attention to the conservation in this country and in Vermont, especially because, as you know, the first settlers who came in cut the trees and destroyed the landscape. And his speech basically became really the beginning of the conservation movement in this country. And Man and Nature was the book that followed, but it really was the beginning of the conservation movement. But as you look for the changes that have taken place in Vermont over a long period of time, you know, we grew grains at one time and lost that because of insects, but also because of competition with the West and other parts of the country. We were the sheep capital of the country, almost of the world at one time, with merino sheep. even though the guy who brought them into Vermont wasn't the first guy to bring them into the United States. It was Colonel Humphrey in Connecticut who really brought them in the first time. But we lost that because of the tariffs being lost. And can you hear me?
I don't think so.
Yes. If you can speak up a little bit louder, because
The
we don't,
tariffs,
Is it working all right?
the mics are recording for PEG TV,
the
but
tariffs
not.
being lost and losing that competition to the West. We then became the butter capital in around 1850, with St. Albans doing more butter than any place else, winning awards around the world for that butter. And that was lost when the fluid milk market began and people, cities reaching out. And during that time, of course, over that period of time, what really, the early people who saw this change said, you know, Vermont's future is never competing with the West on a commodity basis. You can never win in that game. Never win in that game. It's always producing those products that the consumers and the growing markets in the area will want, and that will require ingenuity, capital, marketing ability, and doing new things. Well, James will tell you, and I can tell you too, that the dairy industry, and there was a lot of work in the early 1900s and early late 1800s looking at how to make the dairy industry, as one example, more sustainable. And the model that eventually was used was a national model that was get big or get out. And that's the model that exists today. Even on the organic side, it's get big or get out, unfortunately, as a model. But and how you change that direction is difficult, if not impossible, because it requires really people on the land doing new things and being supported. You know, we're seeing the growth of breweries and other things. In 1820, Vermont had more distilleries than towns in the state of Vermont. More distilleries than the towns in the state of Vermont. And it wasn't until the Temperance Union of 1850 came in and outlawed drinking, except for church services and ceremonies. So I think church service went up pretty quickly after that. But the things that have always been successful in our agriculture sector is people doing new things, new products on the land. Vermont does have a reputation for that, but it's difficult, it's hard, because it takes capital, it takes ingenuity like you're doing here, and it takes perseverance. But during James will tell you about dairy, he and I talk about it all the time, trying to change things. Vermont, the early people who wrote about Vermont, even in 1932, when they did the Future of Vermont, they did a whole section on agriculture. They said Vermont's real value is growing grass, growing good products, having clean water, soil health, and doing those things that are things that we talk about today, Philip, with regenerative agriculture. It's not a new concept. It goes way back. But those are the things that really have been indicated early on as the values that Vermont should lead with. But we've all got into this thing of, even our co-ops are into the mood of, let's just let the status quo continue. But that's not where the future is. So I won't continue.
Thank you, Roger. Now, James, you've been in this battle for quite some time. You said you started out as an organic vegetable grower, right, but then you transitioned into becoming an organic dairy farmer. And
I started out, I was first certified by Rodale Press in 1969, and in those days you just filled out a little form in the back of the magazine and sent it in with $12 or whatever it was, and I got a letter back saying, congratulations, you're now certified. I'd love to know if they still have that. record. I don't know if they do. Rodale, of course, as I hope all of you know, is the organic capital of this country, at least, if not the world. But then my wife, Suki, who's over here, she and I bought a conventional farm in Leicester, which is about 45 minutes north, right up Route 7. That was in 1986. And we started right away on day one to certify it, which takes 3 years and not a little money, because you're farming organically, but you're selling conventionally. And we thought, well, okay, that's fine. We can do that for 3 years. We didn't know that we would be doing it for 10 years because the state was not hostile to organic dairy, but they weren't helpful about it either. So we were pretty much on our own. We were the third certified dairy in Vermont in 1989. The first one was Peter Young, who was milking just 5 cows. He literally was milking. I think he had machines, but he collected his milk in buckets and took them to a little bathtub-sized thing, where he heated up the milk, and then he opened the tap and put it into jugs, and put top on and drove it down to the local market in Marshfield, and that's the way he did it. And then the next one was Jack Laser, the indefatigable Jack Laser, and I don't know how many of you remember that years ago during the Iraq War, people used to say there were 2 or 3 Saddam Husseins. Well, there had to be 2 or 3 Jack Lasers, because Jack grew his own grain, he milked his own cows, he made his own yogurt, he distributed his own yogurt. I mean, I have no idea how Jack did all it, because as I think most people know, farming itself is a full-time job. So our farm burned down in 1996, and we had enough sense to realize that we had learned our lesson, and we did not go back in. We did not rebuild. We had Ben and Jerry's come and sit at our kitchen table and swear to us that what we were doing was what they had been talking about. We had Stonyfield come and sit at our kitchen table and tell us that this is what they'd been talking about, and they wanted to buy our milk, but they wouldn't. And so, to make a long story short, we made certified organic milk for about 7 years, 6 or 7 years, and never sold a drop as organic. It all went down the road in a regular truck, and that's discouraging. That's discouraging. And so that brings us up to the present. And how many know about Horizon and the announcement? Do we all know this? We don't all know. Okay, so I'm going to tell the people that don't know. Horizon is not a cooperative. Horizon, which is based in Denver, I believe, is an organic milk manufacturer. And we knew about Horizon back in the 80s, and we didn't much like the kind of noises they were making. They looked a little opportunistic to us. The Cooley River Organic Co-op in Wisconsin, which is now called Northeast Organic Co-op, they were making the right noises, and we wanted to do that. We wanted Vermont to have an organic dairy co-op so that we could go around, pick up milk from our own farmers, process that into dairy products of all kinds, and then distribute those and make money. That didn't happen for a whole lot of reasons. But in any case, Horizon started picking up, I don't know how many years ago, 15?
At least, yeah.
Maybe something 15 years ago, started picking up around here. And of course, between 1989, when we were certified, and about 10 years ago, organic grew from 3 to about 200. And this is while, all the while organic conventional dairy was shrinking at about 8% a year. Organic is growing 8% a year. Now, you would think that would catch somebody's attention, but it didn't. And so, to make a long story short, Horizon has just declared about 2 months ago that they are no longer going to pick up milk from Vermont organic dairies because we're too small time. They don't want to be bothered with little old Vermont dairies. They want to pick up from large Midwestern And that raises a problem because the organic standards don't allow large farms. And yet the organic standards, which were written by Senator Leahy here in Vermont, have somehow become flexible. They're not supposed to be flexible. And so it allowed large, and I mean by large, I mean 300, 400, 500 maybe, I don't even know, maybe larger, farmers to declare that they were organic, but they're not, because they're not observing the pasture rule. And they're also breaking the origin of livestock rule, and I don't need to go into the details, but the point is that Horizon can say sayonara to Vermont farmers, all of whom do observe the rules. The big ones in the Midwest are not observing them. Well, they're killing themselves, because the problem with dairy, are you ready for this? The problem, I mean, dairy gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and they make more and more milk, and the more milk they make, the lower the price goes. And when you make too much product that you can't sell, the price goes below cost. How's that? I did that in under a minute.
You did it well.
And so the problem with Vermont Dairy is that they can't make milk for less than it costs them to make. So Vermont Dairy, we're about 600, 400 conventional, I think, 450, something like that, and they are essentially making $20 milk that they're selling for $16.50 or $17, and there are 20 million hundredweights made in Vermont. So they're losing somewhere between $50 and $60 million as an industry. The next time you hear about how important Vermont Dairy is to the Vermont economy, I mean, if this were such a good plan, I mean, we should spread the word, you know, to other industries around the world would like to know that if you start losing money, you could become very, very important. So right now where we are is Vermont Dairy is facing two crises. One is conventional dairy is unviable, not viable, and now Vermont Organic, the only good news, and Vermont Organic is also unviable. And I'll come back in a minute and tell you why Vermont Dairy is facing a watershed moment right now.
So, next we have Vermont's future. Two young, new farmers that start on their own farm next year. And, you know, you have to include folks that are going to live that future. And we can give you advice, but we need to know what your hopes and dreams are, why you chose Rutland County, why you chose Vermont, and what do you hope this future is?
Sure. Well, I guess essentially we chose Rutland County and Boardman Hill to incubate at and stuff like that, with our connection from Green Mountain College, and getting a sense of community through Green Mountain has made us appreciate the folks that were around, the work that we're doing, and the work that we want to do. And I guess why farming, right? Why farming? We want to farm because the lifestyle is romantic. It's we want to work with the land. We want to be involved in nature every day, and we want to be an integral part of the community that we're living in by feeding folks healthy, nutritious food without doing that much harm to the environment.
Yeah, and I think so far the farming community has been very open, and a lot of different farmers have helped us. Greg has helped us a lot, and I don't know, it just seems like an open and welcoming community that we hopefully can thrive in. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, we really don't know what the hell we're doing. We're young and just going at it. We have a lot of determination, and there's nothing stopping us. I don't know. what else are we doing, I guess, is, that's kind of what else are we doing? And we might as well do something that's beneficial to everyone else.
Yeah. Now, you guys have already hooked up with some potential markets into the future, and part of what Roger was saying, some of those new creative products that are coming out of Vermont that aren't maple, that aren't milk, with Butterfly Bakery, and looking at, okay, we're not going to just compete and grow things on the for speculation. You've already signing up contracts for crops that would not be normal Vermont crops, like hot peppers.
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of rethinking what Vermont agriculture looks like. We look at dairy, and quite frankly, we see dairy going on decline, and see less folks our age eating dairy and consuming dairy. And I think the amount of vegetables that people are consuming now, it seems that might be the trip folks are going on. And rebranding Vermont, I think, is something we might have to do, and rebranding the products that we ship out of the state is something that we have to think about and consider, and be open to change and see a change for the state.
Yep. Maya, I'm so impressed. You came to start working, finishing up your degree in what's that?
Elementary ed.
Yeah, in elementary ed, and just wanted to change. And now here you are, 4 months later, 5 months later, choosing to be a farmer and put yourself at risk rather than taking a nice job in a classroom. How did that evolution take place?
I don't know. I was interested in farming for a while, especially at Green Mountain, because a lot of people, I don't know, just a lot of my friends, like we were friends at Green Mountain, and a lot of people were in the ag system there. And I was really interested in, louder? Sorry. So I was just interested in trying it out, trying to farm and see if I liked it. And yeah, I like it more than I thought. And I don't know, I guess I just wanted to try it out on my own or with you together. Instead of like working for other people forever. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and you're good at it. So, Philip, you have been in this mess for quite some time, trying to figure it all out. I mean, you've been all over the world doing studies in India and Italy. You've been the impetus behind so many of the programs at Green Mountain College, training so many of the young farmers, and that Green Mountain has actually seeded in this state. And then you started this Sterling College program and really got involved there. And what do you know, how do we move forward? What is this future? You've been looking at those pieces and parts and trying to figure out exactly how all of this is going to work. And I know you're passionate about it. And I put you on the spot. What are the what are the opportunities and what are the obstacles about moving some form of profitable agriculture that it has the capacity to keep our landscape a working landscape and keeping all those positive externalities of agriculture?
Yeah. I'm done. That's too hard. No, I think just to start with, I mean, to have a place like this as home, to be in the Meadowy Valley where we are, to be here with VFFC, the fact that things are growing. I mean, I think since we've known each other, Greg, for the past 22, 23 years, when there's that continuum, in some ways, in some areas of the world, perhaps you would feel more depressed. I actually feel more hopeful, for being here, just driving around today, and then being out in the fields as well, just thinking about how incredibly fortunate we are. I mean, my 12-year-old daughter says, "Papa, this is like paradise." I'm like, yes, it is like paradise. And, it's not perfect, but we're here, and we have people who are visionaries, people who, like Greg, who've wanted to build things out, for so long. I think, when we start looking nationally and internationally, globally, planetarily, it starts to, there is this weight, that starts to set upon us. But like I said, I do feel more hope, because I think we're starting to realize, and Roger was there with a lot of this history since really the inception of the Vermont Farm to Plate, 11, 12 years ago. Roger was chairing or co-chairing the Sustainable Ag Council, and that was 12, 13 years ago. We were sitting around the table and, people trying to figure out what needs to be done. And then all of a sudden we had one graduate student, Dave Timmons at UVM, who is working on doing a study to see what's happening with local agriculture in Vermont. And that was the first study that we'd seen at the time, where he said, we're at about 5% in terms of local production. And then the conversation started to turn, well, what do we need to do to bump that up? And so then the idea of Vermont Farm to Plate started to come up. And part of the reason that started to happen was because the philanthropist in the state said, we've got you folks here with Raffle, Rutland Area Farm and Food Link at the time. We've got other people in the Northeast Kingdom, other people around the state. Everybody's coming to us wanting to create these regional food hubs, and I called them at the time sort of food fiefdoms. We all sort of had our food fiefdoms. We were coming to the philanthropist, and they said, wait, this isn't coordinated. There at least needs to be more conversation and communication, and it's still not perfect, but Vermont Farm to Plate really was kind of born out of that and trying to get us to think as a state together. So I think now we're at just over 11% were the figures last year. It depends on whose numbers you use and kind of how it's quantified, but so we've gotten the low-hanging fruit. So for me, that feels good. That feels promising. But now we're sort of at the point where how do we amp it up? And I think COVID is this inflection point that's really helped us realize that the supply chains out there don't necessarily make sense. I mean, I just heard on Marketplace this morning that we're talking about, supply chains are disrupted for at least the next 18 months, probably for the next 3 years. Some folks think interminably. So what does that do for us? We have insect populations that are, crashing, so we're talking about the insect Armageddon, and we've got songbird populations that are crashing. I mean, there are all these signals out there, without even introducing climate change into it, of what do we need to do? And I think the best thing we can do is take charge of and I don't mean that in the proprietary sense, but really I guess the way I could summarize it is, when I wrote this book a couple of years back called Rebuilding the Food Shed, and so then as an academic you have to get into the whole thing of what's a food shed, how do you define it, and so I went through all these years of history of what is a food shed, and it actually started with Walter Hedden, who was head of the Port Authority, or the equivalent of the Port Authority in New York City, and the term watersheds had become very popular in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Walter Hedden started thinking about the flow of food coming into New York City and how they were going to sustain themselves, the same as with water. And so he coined this term food shed. But in the end, as I kind of look through and I think about what is a food shed, I think the way I define it for myself now is really, it goes as far out as the periphery of your ability to impact change and positive change. And for me, that's a food shed, and that's what we can do. And now we have to figure out ways to, James, to your point, is, how do we actually tackle this in such a way that we can hopefully create regional and distributed food supplies, and that distributed piece, think about what we've done with renewable energy, for example, even Green Mountain Power here, and the fact that they understand that energy needs to be distributed, and sometimes your system fails and you have to call people in from out of state to come help you out, but how do we do it on a distributed scale? And so I think that really is sort of the heart and soul of VFFC in some ways, and the heart and soul of the hope as far as I can see it.
And I know we've been talking about this, we go from 5% to 10% in 10 years, and now we've got a new 10-year plan. And that's just speaking local, so that's, and I believe, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but we're about, in state, we're about $2.7 billion annually spent on local food. So we're at 10%, yay, but 90% of 2.7 billion is the potential. That's not even talking about distributing and getting regional and including New York, and what is the numbers, 40 million people within 4.5 hours of where we sit tonight. So one way of looking at it is not getting depressed that we're only at 5 or 10%, but thinking that, wow, we have so much potential, but we need to organize and figure it out and create those pathways, like you're saying. And we're working right now, and you're on that committee with the wholesale. What's that grant?
The Wholesale Food Committee.
Yeah. And so, the path forward. And Roger, you've been sitting in that seat in the Agency of Ag, and you've been so heavily involved for so many years. And you've seen the issues with dairy, but now there's so many more opportunities, and Vermont has always transitioned, always managed to find a new way. And what is the new way?
Well, they have, but it's always taken time, it's always taken money, it's always taken leadership, and it's always taken the willingness to say, we can't do it the old way. But the problem is that we have still a lot saying we're stuck to the old way, unfortunately. I did a little comparison, just out of human interest, of the 1918 flu and COVID-19 and food systems changes that have taken place. And it's interesting, 1918, the flu hit Vermont very, very hard. I think around 12% of the population died from the flu. Our population was about 356,000 people at that stage. We were beginning to be a dairy fluid milk state, but we were very diversified, and refrigeration didn't exist by and large then. That came in 1930 period. But the roaring 20s came in after that, and you had a lot of things happening there, radio and gasoline and power, but we didn't have the big markets. Farms are very diversified. People survived. They grew their own food. Certainly World War I were the Victory Gardens, and actually there was a big school children and women were in charge of increasing food production. There was a great deal of emphasis on food production. And so you didn't, and of course you had a different welfare system back then. In 1968 or so, they came in with a state welfare system that did away with the overseer of the poor and the poor farms that existed up until that time. But you had a very localized food system that was able to survive within that very devastating flu that hit the state and region at that time. Today, you can see what happened, as Philip said, with the distribution system that exists. I have notes that there's 3 or 4 companies that control much of the processing of the beef and the chicken industry in this country, sell most of the seeds, sell most of the chemicals. It's a very consolidated system. Dairy, for example, according to the USDA, is the most rapidly consolidated agriculture industry in the United States. Pork has already done it. Potatoes have done it. Chickens have done it, right? And that's what happened. But in order to have what Phillips says is necessary to have those ingredients, farm to plate, but you need capital, you need markets, and you need people on the ground doing new things and being supported doing new things. And, Jasper Hill with what they've done with cheese, here 2 visionaries came in, are doing what they're doing. That's one example. But other products as well. There are people on the ground who come in with new ideas and develop the markets or make the markets and new products. We're seeing it with beer and alcohol. It's not a new thing. I say it's a renaissance of the past. New people doing old things with new technologies. New people doing old things with new technologies. Because what you're doing, Greg, these things existed in the past. People were doing these things.
Yep.
They had that ingenuity. But it takes a willingness to say, we're not going to be comfortable with the status quo. We're not going to be comfortable. But to do it, it's the young people like this that make it happen, but with support. They need the support. In training as well.
Yep.
Though it's not easy, Greg.
No, I know, but I think all of us are here today because we want it to happen. And I think there's many more circles like this around the state in virtually every region.
And unfortunately, because I worked in D.C. for Jim Jeffords years ago on the House Ag Committee, our national ag policy does not encourage this kind of change.
Yeah.
In my view.
My view, too. Now, James, you were a vegetable grower. You worked and you were in dairy and organic. And is there a way or a path for, because you've talked about transitioning conventional ag dairy to organic ag dairy.
Yeah.
Certainly, like you pointed out in your article, we're paying to clean up the lake, but then we're also subsidizing the major polluters of the lake. So it seems like we'll never get very far with that.
That's right.
You've been doing this for a long time. Is there a way? Is there a brand or something?
For those who are not familiar with Farm to Plate, I encourage you all to go online and get their plan. The Farm to Plate plan, which has, I guess, been written for 10 or more years, is the best analysis of the farm. I don't find any fault with Farm to Plate plan. And it's certainly remarkable that Vermont has somehow come from growing 5% of our own food to 11. I mean, that's a double, and that's good. But 90 is a big number. 90 is a big number, and so I'm going to drop back in time here and give you a little parable. Back in the 1920s. When the automobile industry was just sort of getting on its feet, they knew that petroleum, which is what, of course, is refined in order to make gasoline. If you refine to refine petroleum into gasoline requires several expensive steps, and you get it to the point where it'll burn in a car. It's not great. It did this thing called knocking, and one of the petroleum or some group of petroleum engineers discovered that if they added tetraethyl lead to gasoline, it would somehow make it burn like high-octane gasoline. There was a problem with that. It also gave out a very poisonous gas. Lead is a very, very poisonous element, and as a gas, it's in the atmosphere, and where people are going to, no problem, where it's cheap. And so, to make a long story short, the automobile industry grew up on leaded gasoline because it was cheap. And we knew about this other problem, and we pretty much we didn't ignore it. We tried to wish it away, and by the 70s, we couldn't wish it away any longer. And so the United States government finally said, you know, okay, enough with the leaded gasoline. We're going to take the lead out, and Amoco is going to make, we're going to subsidize Amoco in order to make unleaded gasoline, but this is expensive, and we're going to phase one out and the other in. And so I remember a time, you probably remember, where you go to the pump, and there would be leaded gasoline here for 50 cents a gallon, and unleaded gasoline right next to it for 40 cents a gallon. And guess which one people bought? They bought the leaded gasoline, of course. They couldn't have cared less. That dime became the most important thing in the world. I'm not a sucker, right? So I'm not going to buy this silly thing called unleaded gasoline. Well, it took them about 6 years to figure out that we're not going to make this transition unless we get rid of leaded gasoline. We're going to take it off the market so that people don't have this choice any longer. Well, they did that, and there was a little bit of a hue and cry, and of course a lot of people who suffered. There was a lot of capital invested in leading gasoline, and so there was a lot of moaning and groaning. Today, leaded gasoline is a factoid. It's gone, except the airplane people still use it. I don't know if you know that or not, but they still use it. So the reason I'm telling you this is because the big problem with moving from 11% up to 20% or 30% or 40%, the prevailing agricultural paradigm, not just in Vermont, but all across the country, not just across the country, all across the world, is conventional. And conventional agriculture delivers lots of cheap food, and it poisons the environment. Never mind the poisoning of the environment. Did I mention that it delivers lots and lots of cheap food? Well, that's the only important thing. So in order for Vermont to move into that territory, we are going to have to stop farming conventionally. And the way we're going to do that, although I haven't convinced anybody of this, Vermont has environmental laws. Mr. Leahy himself, for example, has his name on the Lake Champlain Community Center, or whatever it's called, the Lake Center up there. He also wrote the organic regulations. But for since the 1960s, Vermont has tolerated conventional agriculture while knowing, not acknowledging, but knowing that it is the largest polluter in the lake. So earlier I mentioned that we're at this watershed moment because Vermont has just passed a thing called the Global Warming Solutions Act. And the Global Warming Solutions Act mandates, does not suggest, it mandates that we lower our greenhouse gas emissions. And I don't mean just a shade here and a shade there. I mean 25% before 2025. 25%. And we're supposed to knock it down by 45% by 2035 and 80% by 2050. Those are big numbers. And we don't have the option any longer of saying, well, we tried. No. We've empowered anybody to sue the state if we don't meet those standards. So Vermont cannot meet those standards and farm conventionally. We are it's time to fish or cut bait. And what I live in fear of is that the state, having done this, there's a little bit of space between the cup and the lip, huh? I mean, it's one thing to pass a law that says these are the standards and we're going to meet these standards. It's quite another to put them into effect in a way that is meaningful. So somewhere out there is somebody who's thinking of keeping the state's feet to the fire on these standards. And dairy at the present time is responsible for 45% of the pollution that goes into the lake every year, and something around 18%, that's what they say, I think it's higher, 18% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And the state's answer to that is, well, we're going to plant cover crops, and we're going to use what do you call them, riparian buffers, and manure injection. All of these are compensating ideas, and none of them are new, and none of them is going to get us down 18%. We're not going to get there pretending that we're addressing this problem. The only way to do it is to stop farming conventionally entirely. And that means we should farm organically. And so here we have this news coming from Horizon Dairy just a month or two ago that says, oh, never mind Vermont Organic Dairy, we're not interested in that anymore. And the state's attitude toward that is, oh, we're going to study that. Oh, we're going to have a task force. Are we doing anything more than that? Just a task force to look at this. As organic dairy, the only hope that Vermont agriculture has dwindles away right under our eyes. Meanwhile, one of the largest conventional dairies in the state is adding another 900 cows up in Bristol right now. The Four Hills are building another right under the state's nose, and they are permitted. They can't be permitted. We can't meet the global warming. Did I mention that? We can't meet the Global Warming Solutions Act goals and farm conventional. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Phil, Maya, you guys have chosen and are going through the process to be certified organic right now. Why did you choose organic? For the very same reasons that James is talking about? Because that's what you've been brought up? You know, what do you?
Yeah, it's just, we're new farmers, so it's hard for people to know what our standards are going to be and what we're practicing. So I think that's a good way to tell the consumer what we're producing.
I mean, even with the standard of organic, you can still get away with some certain things that, you know, traditionally wouldn't be organic. To what I would consider to be organic, you know what I mean? You know, you can use like volcanic nitrogen fixer that has, you know, used a lot of labor costs and sending that from wherever it was into the country and stuff like that. So there are some gray areas with organic, but the standard there is still, there's a practice. There's a school of thought that folks should get turned on to, and you know, I guess, you know, for us the organic thing was more of a marketing aspect, because we're young, you know, we have to make a living, and there is a premium for the organic label, and but even with that, our practices, our philosophies stand true to organic, and even a little more than that.
Personally buy organic food, and I think a lot of people in here probably do, so yeah. We want to follow those protocols as well.
Yeah, James, do you see any, let's say the governor raises and waves the wand and transitions conventional dairy and pays, like you had suggested, rather than subsidizing bad practices, basically pays for them to transition to organic. How does Vermont Dairy, even at 100% organic, go forward and capture market when still we can't get, like Roger said, this insane concentration to pay attention to such a small state that produces such a small quantity of milk.
Can I say something kind of interesting? Because, James and I talk a lot in the past. Ben & Jerry's, owned by Unilever, big international company. Some of these big companies now are saying, well, we're a B corporation. And even Cabot, we're a B corporation. And if you look at the specifications for a B corporation, let us say, treat farmers well, all these social things.
Soil health.
Soil health. I haven't seen any of it. I haven't seen it. So a few years back, approached Ben & Jerry's and said, why aren't you organic? Well, the consumers think we're organic. Oh, yeah? Consumers think you're organic. Well, why aren't you organic then? Well, we'd have to blow more air into our ice cream. We'd have to, and we wouldn't get our price points. Yeah, but you're a B corporation. Well, we believe in helping farmers. Well, why aren't you organic and all this stuff? Well, the consumers think we're organic.
Image is more important than reality.
I can tell you, and I'll try to be brief about this. I mean, the way for Vermont to convert the dairy industry begins with the statement from the governor that this is what we're going to do. We're going to stop, and the justification for converting to organic is not because of the health of the food or anything like that. It's the pollution in the lake. Vermont has a duty to clean up the lake. So we're no longer going to pretend that we're doing that. We're going to do it. And the first thing we're going to do is reform dairy. So now we have a thing called Act 64. Act 64 was passed back in 2015. It had to do with the pollution in the lake, and the TMDL, which is the total maximum daily load, charged conventional dairy with reducing pollution by a whopping 66%. 66%. To date, they have achieved 11, and they're nowhere near going any farther than that. And they do this with state approval. So they're stuck there. Well, if the state said we're not satisfied with 11, we're going to eliminate conventional dairy. So now we look to Act 64. Act 64 is the so-called Vermont's Clean Water Law. The Clean Water Law deals with the three sources of pollution that enter the lake. Impervious surfaces, parking lots and rooftops and so forth, that's about 45%. And then there's wastewater treatment, which is about 4 or 5%, the smallest of them. And then there's agriculture, so-called agriculture, that's another 45%, more or less, something like that. Well, the Act 64 does not deal directly or even mention the three things that conventional dairy does that pollutes the lake. No problem. We're going to allocate $35 million a year to clean up dairy without mentioning the fact that they import 40,000 tons of artificial fertilizer that goes onto the land, into the cow, or into the corn, into the cow, down the hill and into the lake. We import 600,000 tons of high phosphorus, high calcium feed supplements. No mention of that in Act 64. And we have now 34 dairy farms in Vermont, up from only 12 or 14 5 years ago, now 34 that house over 800 cows. And you can't, I mean, if you're that concerned about the water, you can't have 1,000 or 2,000 cows under one roof, because that's a concentration of manure, to say nothing of all the fertilizer and so forth. So if we eliminate conventional dairy, we not only eliminate all that pollution, we now have $34 million a year to give to farmers to convert. That's the short version.
Yep. Bob.
Is part of the solution also transitioning away from fluid dairy?
I can't envision, I don't envision that.
I don't envision that, and,
There's no question that people are eating more nut milk and so on. No question about that. More nut milk or almond milk.
Almond milk
so
and all,
forth.
that's been
question
going
about
on, and fluid milk has been going like that for years, and, but butter's going like that, actually,
Well, so's cheese.
and cheese is going like that.
I mean, there's pizza, people love pizza, but, you know, and the Secretary of Agriculture, not this Secretary of Agriculture, the present Secretary of Agriculture, will talk about how milk consumption is up because of cheese. He doesn't mention this thing called the utilization. Farmers get paid way less than their costs for making
They
cheese.
get a blend price,
Yeah.
which it's something that
goes to cheese, they
goes
get
back to
less.
1937. So,
Yeah.
you know, but, you know, I think the conversation about, you know, saying organic, I think the conversation ought to be about clean water, soil health, and say to have clean water, these things have to be done. You can't do these chemicals or pesticides anymore.
It's over.
But take the word organic out, because people get so hung up about organic and non-organic, and it creates this dichotomy. Say, we're going to move in the fashion that clean water, good soils, and clean water means we're transitioning to no pesticides and fertilizers.
You know, I agree with you, because what we do here at the Food Center, we try to avoid dividing the growers and the folks. So I'm no longer certified organic. I was probably the first certified farm in Rutland County. I haven't changed my practices, but I'm no longer certified organic. And these folks are choosing to be certified organic because they don't have a customer base, they don't have a following, they don't have a brand yet. So that organic gives them that brand. But yes, when we begin an incubator farm, the market is going to push people towards good agricultural practices. And I think I agree with you that, and I'm an organic guy, always been. But sometimes that becomes a lightning rod for divisive language, and people begin to make camps.
Remember what I said about the gasoline?
Yes.
You are going to offer organic milk and conventional milk side by side in the case. They're going to buy the conventional. We'll never make farming profitable in Vermont unless it pays a premium over costs.
Yes, absolutely.
And conventional, if the farmers agree they're no longer going to use toxic chemicals and they're going to do the following things and so on and so forth, but they're still going to milk 2,500 cows, they're still selling their milk for $16.
Yeah. I get it.
I think there's some problems with the marketing side, and has been for some time.
Yeah.
I can go into the history.
But we don't want that,
Yeah.
right? We don't want $16 milk.
I can go, you know, Farm Credit Banks years ago, when they had the Springfield banks, did a study on the history of the future of the dairy industry at that time. I had the book, 1984. I kept it. And Vermont's dairy industry, people say, well, we have so much milk and all that. Our growth in dairy industry has been less than 0.5 of 1% a year since 1984.
Growth. Yeah, but, yeah.
No, and let me go into it further. And even back then, we knew that we couldn't compete with the West. Never could compete with us. We knew that we were going to be losing farms. But the co-ops got locked into this pricing system. You know, Agrimark Cabot came about because Cabot was bankrupt. Cabot was bankrupt in 1985. Bankrupt. And so Agrimark didn't have a brand, so they were put together because they needed a brand. Roberta McDonald did a great job at building that brand, but they haven't built a system that can survive long term. I'll tell you, my feeling, Agrimark Cabot is positioned to be bought out by somebody because they don't have the farmer capital to survive long term.
Right.
And so the future, even for their dairy farmers, is questionable.
questionable. You know, and so I have some questions from the audience, and this plays right into that too, because plant-based dairy, which I know a lot of young folks are getting into, and that, how does that affect the future of liquid milk dairy?
Nut milk?
Nut milk, almond milk, just all kinds of plant-based milk.
Non-dairy.
Non-dairy milk.
Let me say a little bit about history, because this is interesting. So when Vermont became a butter state and was a butter capital, margarine came about because Napoleon had given a grant to somebody to develop margarine. And it quickly came to the United States, and plants were making margarine. And the first thing the dairy industry did was create legislation and lobbying groups to say, let's kill that product. Let's kill that product. Yeah. Let's make it go away somehow. Right. Well, they couldn't make it go away. But we're seeing the same thing with the dairy industry saying, let's fight plant-based milk. Well, the best thing to do is to try to figure out how to do those things and become part of it.
Yeah.
And do something.
Yeah, you can't fight it.
Can't fight it. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Another question is, and why is organic?
Can I add to this then?
Yes.
So you as a dairy farmer, can you as a dairy farmer, can you adjust your practices so you, while you're organic and you use cows for milk, can you also do something to support the non-dairy industry? That way you're going with the times into the future, what the future holds.
When we first arrived here, my learning curve was nearly vertical. I was learning something every minute of every day. Sometimes 2 things a minute every day. I mean, it was just amazing. But very often, something that you would learn right now on the 10th or 11th of October, I couldn't really implement it for another year. I mean, I might choose a particular kind of soybean to plant, not in October, of course, and then realize, oh, that was the wrong variety. A year would pass before I could make that, and maybe I didn't make the right choice again. Now another year would go by. So the dairy farmer is not nimble. He learns. He has a big investment in his physical plant. Not much changes. Not much changes. So and not to help the plant, but let them do. They're going to deal with it. It's another business, really. It's another product. And I have nothing against nut milk, but it's not going to happen here. But we don't grow nuts in Vermont.
Why?
Yeah. Why? Well, we don't really grow. Dairy is by far Vermont's largest agricultural commodity. It's something right now. It's going down from 80% to now it's down closer to 60, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
60%. Vermont makes no noticeable amount of beef, pork, apples, fruit, vegetables, nuts, on and on, fiber. We make just 1% of the nation's dairy in Vermont, 1%, and no real noticeable portion of any of these other things. We don't have the climate, we don't have the topography, we don't have the labor, we don't have the transportation infrastructure. Now, curiously, all of that is in California. The water reclamation projects of the 1920s and 30s essentially fallowed Vermont farming. You know that, right?
Very well.
I mean, they pulled the rug right out from underneath Vermont farming. We were already on the skids. But after the water reclamation project, well, guess what? They're having a bit of a problem in California right now. They don't have any water. That's a long story, and if you haven't read Cadillac Desert, it's a great book. It'll tell you the story about
absolutely
why California is
and why they should have never done it.
And why they never should have done it, and it was foreseeable. This is not going to restore Vermont farming, not in any meaningful way. We are not all of a sudden going to become the breadbasket of the world. So we have to stick with, we have to do what we can grow here.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to put a damper on your business at all. Really, I'm not.
Well, here's a question that I think plays right into that. Vermont no longer misses merino sheep.
No.
And if you told somebody in the late 1800s that the sheep would be gone,
I know.
they wouldn't
locked up.
They wouldn't have believed you.
Well, they would have, actually.
Yeah.
If you read the history, they would have believed it, because the people, I can dig out the books and the quotes, the people who were sheep breeders and went through that period, some of them in the end said, you know, the dairy industry is going to face the same issue that we faced as sheep breeders.
And
We're gonna
that's
have the same problem.
That's the follow-up here. Why is it harder to imagine no more Vermont milk?
Well, we do have sheep.
Yeah. But,
We don't envision no more Vermont.
I don't think, I mean,
I know, but there's still some sheep, too.
You've got some people still now even, well, you know who they are. I mean, take the Miller boys down in Vernon. They ship to Stonyfield, but they also can take some of their milk and bottle it. And they're doing some bottling, and they're selling it to hospitals and the stores, and I think they're doing all right with it. So there are people doing that kind of thing, and the problem today, people don't know what good milk is either.
Yeah.
Tasting-wise.
Yeah.
They don't know what. I grew up on raw milk, right out of the cow, but people don't know what good milk tastes like today.
Yeah.
But some of these people.
Modern milk is extruded to within an inch of its life. I mean, they.
Oh, yeah, it's not the same product.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. I mean, they've done everything they can to cheapen it, and they're ripe for Vermont organic, fair trade, glass bottled milk has a market. They're dying for it down in New York and Washington and Boston.
Roger and I had that conversation.
They're dying for it. You'd never know it by talking to anybody up here in the state.
No, you won't get
Never
anywhere.
know it. Never know it.
Yeah.
And by the way, a half gallon of organic milk at Dean and DeLuca right now in New York City costs $14, a half gallon. Meanwhile, Vermont is trying desperately to squeeze a profit out of selling milk for $3 a half gallon.
Yeah. So, with that, because dairy is 1% of national, we were the leader, turkeys, wool, lamb, sugar, so many things in history. We've always transitioned, and we've always managed to find a leadership position.
Well, this question, do the transition, we can do it in like a route.
But it doesn't happen overnight. Even to going to fluid milk, they didn't have the right cows to begin with.
Oh my God, we got to get rid of those free sheep.
This question is, and this is to all the panelists, what areas do you believe that Vermont can lead in, not necessarily in percentage, but in desire, with the right marketing, that we can bring something to the market, like you said, with potentially organic, fully organic milk, but there's got to be other things. We've always managed to find that new path. What's that? Other farm products.
Well, it has to be something that doesn't come from anywhere else.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what that would be.
And Philip,
The reason that if the French, as well as the Swiss, the French have been very good at terroir and geographic indicators. They have been very good at saying that these products are located and have some uniqueness to the land. Maple has that uniqueness because you can't grow it in many parts of the world. There's only certain regions you can do maple in. Likewise, Vermont has some value of doing certain things that can't be done easily other places. Well, vegetables, they're a local thing. People want fresh vegetables. They want things like that, but that's a seasonal product. Maple is a seasonal product, and things like that. Cheese. An individual used to run Cabot, Agrimark, years ago. Richie Stammer. No, Richie Stammer. after that.
Oh.
He said to me one time, he said, you know, Vermont cheddar cheese is unique. And I said, what do you mean, unique? He said, there's a certain quality from the grass and from the soil that gives it a flavor in our region that you can't find anywhere else in the West.
That's a marketing tool.
How do you know that? He said, because I know it. I'm who I am. I said, but have you tested it?
Yeah.
Well, maybe there is some terroir around our cheeses.
Yeah.
Maybe there is.
So here's another question. I'm going to start with you, Philip. And what can be done to make a more just food system in Vermont? And, you know, this is what the food hubs and places have been, specifically VFFC, this has been one of our missions and our goals is food access, so that, and I remember seeing this transition to vegetables, and Win Wei was, he didn't see the local food movement that developed. Instead, he was a little depressed because he saw it as yuppie food, and so that he didn't want Vermont to become just serf farmers trying to make as much money by selling to the rich and famous. So that just food system has really, in my opinion, it's been a movement. You know, I'll go with you and Maya.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the conversations, maybe it's just my world right now, but I think that's happening around us is that, for example, when places like VFFC started happening and CAE, the Center for Agricultural Economy in the Northeast Kingdom, and Mad River Food Hub and these other places, you know, we were all trying to figure out, should these different places, should they be nonprofit or should they be for-profit? And so this conversation about food hubs across the country and you know, and the role that places like VFFC play, I think we're there again at kind of an inflection point that's really interesting, because my sense is if we don't have, you know, the right for-profit enterprises that are helping to build out scale and create this economic viability that needs to be there, then we're not going to get where we need to be. And yet at the same time, we need the nonprofit pieces to make sure that we create the impact and the justice. And, you know, I just, my own thinking right now, I'm just at the point where I feel like there's this hybrid piece that we need to play off of more, that's the for-profit and the nonprofit models working together in collaboration, and I think they can. I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive. I think when you look at the state, we've tapped out the nonprofit sector in a lot of ways. I mean, we're limited in how far we can go with philanthropy. That's not going to do it all. So can we, in some form or fashion, figure out, you know, some for-profit models that also make sense, that are complementary?
So how do you do a B Corp that really has value?
Yeah, I mean, and I think, you know, people paying attention, and I think, you know, there's the B Corp and there's a certified B Corp,
yeah.
And certified is a bit better. You know, it starts to kind of get us a little bit closer, but if there's not the tight internal auditing that's going on, and if people don't even understand what B Corps are or the difference between a B Corp and a certified B Corp, I don't think we get too far. So you know, and with Horizon, you know, also being certified B Corp, I mean, how, you know, that ought to be not only a changing conversation about organic and what that means, it ought to be a conversation about certified B Corps and, you know, where, you know, what are they supposed to do?
Well, Cabot is also a B Corp.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Ben & Jerry's. So, I mean, if we got rid of Ben & Jerry's in Vermont, we would get rid of a buyer that buys Class 2 milk from dairy farmers for under cost. Yep. Why do we need them?
Right. Yeah. No, it's a.
Now, Maya,
really
you're a brand new farmer, and you know, and you eat good food, and you pay well for it, and you struggle. You're a young person, not a lot of money. Social justice in your business plan, as you venture into producing food for people. Where does food justice fit into your business plan?
Yeah. I think it's hard because, like, starting a new farm, you need support, and I think a lot of people who maybe want to farm or want to start growing vegetables so people can have access to more local food don't have the support or the help that they need to access the food. Just, it's expensive. You need land or resources, a tractor sometimes. So I think that to make, like, the incubator farm idea, I think that would make a lot more food justice and help people access more local food, organic food, and allow more farmers to become farmers who wouldn't have the opportunity if it weren't for an incubator farm or, you know, inheriting land or something like that.
Yeah, land access,
Yeah.
food access, kind of same track. And now I have a question specifically for Roger. You've been in this for a long time. What are some of the biggest challenges to Vermont's farms today that you didn't see coming in your early years?
Oh, wow, I didn't see it coming. I think the policies that we have put in the state to try to sustain our farm sector have not overall been policies. At the time, they've appeared helpful, but some of them haven't been helpful. Give you an example, and you're probably not the ones you're thinking of. For example, purchase and development rights. Very important to helping farmers stay on the land. But it's also led to consolidation of farms that there's a contingent liability out there waiting to happen with some of these large farms that have had their development rights by buying other farms and becoming so large now that they can't survive, and they exist. And yet, how do you get out of that contingent liability for the state and the holders of that liability, if you follow me?
Yeah, I
Big
do.
issue, but nobody's talking about it. It's there.
Surprised that conversation isn't taking place.
What's that?
I'm surprised that conversation isn't taking place.
Should be taking place because it's there and it's real.
Even look in the Meadowy Valley, which has more conserved farms contiguous than virtually anywhere in the state, and, you know, all well-intentioned.
All well-intentioned.
You know, it made perfect sense 20, 25 years ago, and now when we look at other folks who are trying to get in, you know, the ability to have a smaller or even a mid-scale diversified operation becomes really challenging because of those restrictions. So.
And I do think we saw the pricing system for a long time. You know, I totally believe that we need to go to what you'd call no fertilizers, no pesticides, and that kind of regime. How you get there, because our policies that we have at the federal level, even at the state level, don't encourage a transition, and it needs to be a transition. It has to be a transition.
You have to encourage it with money.
Absolutely.
There's no other way.
There's no other way, because, and why I say organic, because the federal level in terms of dealing with organic, I'll tell you a quick story. I peddled cranberries once. I had a business, international business, developing markets for cranberries worldwide. From Massachusetts cranberries, Dicas company, we developed their international market. And we were in France at a food show. And I looked over and there was, and Dicas' cranberries weren't organic. And there was a lot of posters, organic product. So I went over and there were 5 to 6 booths from China with organic products. And I said to them, they spoke perfect English, until I asked them the question. I said, who certifies you? And all of a sudden they didn't speak English anymore. The point being is that organic, I think sometimes creates, the term creates more problems sometimes because it creates that dichotomy with different groups where if you start saying, let's have no pesticides and fertilizers, move that way, then it takes the term away that sometimes gets people all hung up.
Here's a good question. You know, we've talked a lot about what we want the future of agriculture to be. I think we can go down the line. What do you think it will be, considering what we know about what's happened in the past and what we know about the current economy and what's going on today? So this is what do you think? What will the future be in Vermont? Do you guys want to venture a guess of what Vermont agriculture will look like, let's say, 20 years from now? What will this state look like? What will our agricultural economy look like? Who will we be feeding? Will we be feeding ourselves at a 20-30% rate? Will we be exporting more? Will dairy transition into a more value-added product as liquid milk begins to shrink? We all have a fair amount of expertise in this, and not just expertise, but expectation of what it would be. So, Roger, you want to start?
Wow. Gosh.
This is on tape. So
I mean, if you follow the history, we've always transitioned, but it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
Never happens overnight. The curve doesn't happen just like that. Yeah. I think we'll, go back to 1918, if you will. Diversification seems to be what somehow is needed in terms of not only on the farm, but with the farm sector, diversification. Vermont has a reputation for clean water, clean soils, all that things. Maybe it's not deserved, but it needs to be deserved. So I think we'll have diversification, a lot of different type of products. As I said, a renaissance of the past, new people doing old things with new technology. Technology and innovation, Philip, they seem to be ahead of us in Europe in some way in doing these things. I think a lot of our artisanal cheese sector, a lot of that came from Europe, France. So a lot of ideas from other places that can be implemented on the farm. I think beef, you're seeing a lot of, will this interest in local foods that came out of COVID-19 and the growth of local CSAs and all that, can that be sustained? We saw a backup of slaughterhouses and facilities. Can that be sustained and increased with, to some extent, it gets to be price points too. I mean, when you have 30% of the population food insecure, you've got some issues you got to deal with there on price point. What you've been doing on prescriptions for food systems with healthcare institutions somehow needs to change the paradigm curve with the insurance companies to recognize that good food is one way of keeping people healthy, and if that can be tied in with the food systems going forward in Vermont, that's valuable. But I think it will be diversified. I don't think there will be any one dominant product in the future.
Innovation. Diversification. James.
Well, I would say, when you think of Florida agriculture, of course, we think of oranges. When you think of what agricultural product comes from Maryland, well, it's crabs. What agricultural product do we think of when we think of Maine? It's lobsters.
Potatoes.
Idaho's potatoes, right? Vermont could become could link itself to the words organic, fair trade, glass bottled, cream top milk. We could become the source in people's mind for that product. And I've described briefly how I think we could get there. That's not what I think is going to happen. What I think is going to happen is that we are going to continue to get bigger and consolidate, that food is going to continue to come from larger and larger farms outside of Vermont. And while we will probably still have farmers in the summer, or especially farmers growing either vegetables or raising a few pigs here, or maybe some dairy there, in 20 years, dairy farms will all be 30,000 cows, and none of them will be here. That's what I think is where we're heading. It's cheerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
You asked.
So 20 years from now, I guess with the pandemic and happening and everything like that, I'm looking at the food system becoming more localized and more diversified. But when I think about a diversified food system, I want to think about Vermont becoming a more diversified state. So think about who we are feeding, and as vegetable growers, are we growing, the products that folks that are coming from out of state, out of country, and calling Vermont home, are we growing food that makes them feel at home, gives them a sense of place? And I think when I look at the future of Vermont, I'm seeing more culture come here and create a culture of Vermont that is a melting pot. And for me personally, I think I want to be growing food for folks that want to have a little bit of change, I guess would be the way to say it.
Maya?
I've been noticing a lot of young people really focusing on where they're getting their food and what is going into their food. So I hope to see more organic and less conventional farms in Vermont. I think it's just, hopefully young farmers will have more access to becoming farmers, and the whole population will have more access to buying food. Hopefully it's hard to lower the prices and still pay the farmers, but maybe figuring something out with like the pharmacy program here, that's pretty cool, because they pay the farmers and then the food gets like what you were talking about with the prescriptions to get organic food. So I'd hope to see more programs like that, but I don't know, I can't even imagine what it will look like in 20 years.
Yeah, you've barely crested 20 years.
Yeah.
Philip?
Yeah, I think it's much more than a hypothetical question. I think it's a critical question, because if we don't have a vision for what we want it to be, then it certainly goes down the wrong avenue. I mean, that's just a given, and I could have, sanguine of you as probably you, James, but driving down the road the other 2 days ago with my daughter Addie, again 12 years old, and she soaks in the landscape, the farming, the animals, and she said, literally, she said, "Papa, do you think it'll be like this, when I'm your age?" And it's always changed, to Roger's continual point. But I said, what you love the most is what you have to protect. So that's your job, and it's not easy, and it's not always a lot of fun. But you make it what you want to be, and so. What I would like to see it be is, a combination of the local food piece being certainly part and parcel, being able to tap the urban markets being part and parcel. Also, the third part, I think, is the agritourism piece. And I don't mean just the kitsch. I mean, I lived in this area in the Alps that went literally from being the poorest province in all of Italy to the wealthiest. And that was, a large part of that was agritourism. They sold their soul in some cases as a result of that, which I think we have to remember. But they did find a way toward more prosperity, and so that they can still support the mountain farmers who are up high and subsidize the work that they do, because the cultural landscape is the agricultural landscape. And so how do we do this? And when there's an announcement coming out, which I don't think it's been too public on September 16th with the World Food Summit, sort of the revolutionaries coming out on the 16th with a 24-hour cycle of events, and Sri Lanka is going to announce going to 100% organic as a goal. Bhutan Sri Lanka. So that's going to be announced on the 16th is what I read today. And Bhutan has been trying. I was lucky enough to meet the minister of Sikkim in India a couple of years back, and he was, at that point, had been reelected 7 times, and he had taken Sikkim to as close as they could get to 100% organic. And I said, what's the trick? And he said, we didn't have to segregate our products anymore. If everything was organic, then all of a sudden the system started to make sense for organic. I was, oh, well, that certainly makes a lot of sense. But I think when we're, in the state that we're in right now, where, it looks like the American bumblebee is going to be put on the endangered species list, it's considered extinct from Vermont. My God, what's going on? When we have literally over 50, these are U.S. Government numbers, when more than 50% of our population has at least one chronic disease that's food-related, 42% have at least 2 food-related chronic diseases, something's going awry. So the medical community needs to get on board. The policy folks, we have to get them on board, and I don't know if we use the word organic or not, but I do know that we regionally brand, and you choose the place you love, and you figure out a way to tell that story, because it's that place, it's the experience and the story that really helps foster these pieces. And it's the Vermont Folklife Center and these kinds of things. This is it. This is what makes it up. This is the counter proposal to everything that's potentially going to seep in from the outside and completely dominate if we're not careful. It's those narratives that we're not just able to hang up, but to live with and really help push forward. So I think, sometimes we say it too simply. We say, vote with your fork, you're the consumer. Do the policy thing, you're the citizen. You be the eater because it's what you savor. But, we're the patients as well, in the long run. So we have to be all of those things at one time. We have to be the consumers, the citizens, the eaters, and the patients. And remember that. We have to make it what it is. Do our damnedest. Yep. For the next generation and everything they deserve that we didn't give them.
Yeah. And I'd like to answer that question too. I think that within 20 years there will be a reckoning, and we will drop the use of pesticides, herbicides. We will transition to a more sustainable, resilient form of agriculture. With COVID, I have seen, and anybody that attends the farmers market, we have seen an influx of what I call COVID refugees, people that are running to Vermont to get away from all of those negative pieces of culture and society. And this is potentially that 60s back to the land movement, and that people are really desperate for community, clean food, clean water, clean air, and I can see Vermont being, because we have small is on our side, and we are close to the major metro areas, that it will be milk in glass bottles with cream top, labeled and branded as Vermont. And we will continue to ride that branding that began before any of us were alive. And we will be diversified, and every product that we produce here will be in greater demand. And we will not be the leader in anything other than doing it the right way. And we will feed our people, and we will be resilient, and we will have a local system that is redundant with supply chains that will not fail, because we will be working around the state to make sure that we are capable, no matter what happens. The 1918 flu will be resilient.
I hope you're right. I like that. I like that picture. You remember Roger said a minute ago, Ben and Jerry's wouldn't go organic because the people think we're already organic?
Yes, exposed the lie.
But do you know, if the world thought we were a dirty place, it would cost hundreds of millions of dollars to change their minds. We already have this image, and we're working very hard to destroy it. There are people in the state who have a different vision for what Vermont agriculture is going to be, and they're working very hard to resist, to keep them in business so that they can continue to pollute the lake and the atmosphere, and don't worry about it, you know.
But like you said, their own laws will come home to roost.
Oh, I hope so. Let's hope so. I hope you're right.
That's why we do what we all, that's why we're all here,
Yeah.
to make that vision of the future a reality.
Let's hope you're right. Okay.
But, you know, as Philip said, it's the stories that make the difference.
Yes.
It's the stories that make the difference.
Yeah. So, I think, any other questions? We really thank all of you for coming, and we thank you guys, you know, all of you for coming and being part of this. And the Food Center is going to have more discussions, and so we ask you, the audience, what should they be? What should the topics be? We have some of the most amazing people and resources, and the folks right up here are some of them. And we've just begun to tap our human resources in this community. So, yes, this man, he will be looking over us the whole time.
Really quiet.